Welcome to Discover Your Roots, a podcast that will give you tools for understanding and applying the wisdom of the Bible in your own context. I'm Avery Chenault, and this season we're exploring the land of the Bible. We'll be joined by various biblical scholars who bring insight into the land of the Bible to help us understand God's Word more deeply. Join us as we trace the map of God's story. Welcome back to another episode of Discover Your Roots. Today we take a journey to Be'er Sheva, the edge of the Promised Land, where Abraham made a covenant with Abimelech over something as basic and as vital as water. If you ever stood at Tel Sheva, you know just how barren and dry this land is. In that setting, a well isn't just a symbol, it's survival itself. This story from Genesis 21 reminds us that Abraham's faith wasn't only about distant promises, it was about trusting God for daily life in the desert. In this episode, we'll explore how geography, history, and faith all come together in Be'er Sheva, and what that means for us today. Today, our guest is Jared Ulrich. Jared went to Azusa Pacific University for his undergrad, where he majored in biblical studies. He earned his Master's of Divinity at Fuller Theological Studies, where he spent 22 years in full-time church ministry as both a youth pastor and worship pastor. He currently works at Grand Canyon University, where he has overseen GCU's chapel worship services on campus for the past 12 years. He also serves as an adjunct faculty member at the College of Theology, teaching Old Testament and biblical interpretation and application. Jared, thank you so much for joining us today for this episode of Discover Your Roots. I'm really excited for this conversation.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited as well.
Well, I'm going to go ahead and get us started today with our scripture. So today we're going to be discussing Genesis 21, verses 22 through 34. So I'm going to go ahead and read that for us. So these verses say, "At that time, Abimelech and Phicol, the commander of his army, said to Abraham, 'God is with you in all that you do. Now therefore swear to me here by God that you will not deal falsely with me or with my descendants or with my posterity. As I have dealt kindly with you, so you will deal with me with the land where you have sojourned.' And Abraham said, 'I will swear.' When Abraham reproved Abimelech about a well of water that Abimelech's servants had seized, Abimelech said, 'I do not know who has done this thing. You did not tell me, and I have not heard of it until today.' So Abraham took sheep and oxen and gave them to Abimelech, and the two men made a covenant. Abraham set 7 ewe lambs of the flock apart, and Abimelech said to Abraham, 'What is the meaning of these 7 ewe lambs that you have set apart?' He said, 'These 7 ewe lambs you will take from my hand, that this may be a witness for me that I dug this well.' Therefore that place was called Be'er Sheva, because there both of them swore an oath. So they made a covenant at Be'er Sheva. Then Abimelech and Phicol, the commander of his army, rose up and returned to the land of the Philistines. Abraham planted a tamarisk tree in Be'er Sheva and called there on the name of the Lord, the everlasting God. And Abraham sojourned many days in the land of the Philistines." So in this verse, we have a really powerful story of this covenant being made in such a barren land as this desert. They're discussing water and the covenant and building a well, which would be something that's so important even today for this kind of environment. So Jared, you've had the opportunity to visit this place in person. So I'd love for you to kind of just paint the picture of this scene and let us know what kind of features there are and what it's like to stand there today.
Yeah, this was our first stop on our trip to Israel, and we took the bus, and quickly you get into the parking lot, you get out and you look out and it's literally a desert. Like barren wasteland, nothing around. And we went up to the Tel Sheva, which literally, just is the mound there, the ancient city. It's out a little bit outside of the modern day city of Be'er Sheva, but it's just like there's just nothing there at all. And immediately you get there, we went in May, in the middle of May, and you get off the bus and it is blazing hot. It's dry. You just sense it. You can just feel it. And I remember walking in with our tour group, the students, and immediately there was like a little water fountain, and they're automatically like, that was the first thing people, go to the bathroom, and then they're filling up their water bottles. And it just gave me this great mental pictures like, yes, water is like vital. Water would be the most important necessity in a place like this. So you just quickly get that right away. And obviously, a lot could have changed, in the almost 4,000 years since Abraham's time.
Mhm.
but still, it probably was very much a desert wasteland there. One of the biggest things that stood out to me as well when you get there, right in the middle of kind of the ancient ruins there's a little lookout. We all climb the stairs up, and you literally just get a 360-degree angle of all the surrounding areas. So you get up there, you look around, it's a lookout, and you can see for miles, and
Mhm.
there's nothing there. I mean, it's just dry desert wastelands.
Mhm.
This is the area, this is the place, the location from Genesis 21 that we read about here with Abraham.
Yeah, this is, like you said, it's such a barren desert, and just being there really adds so much more context to the story. And even getting to experience those elements a little bit, to experience the harsh sun and the heat. And like you said, you just have to fill up your water bottle because it's so hot there. You need water. It's really quite an experience to experience that kind of environment. And when we're studying the scriptures, it's really important for us to understand the context and the land that these stories were told in, to really give us a clear picture of what God was telling us through these stories. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on what historical and cultural context about Beersheba you think is important for us to know to understand the story.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. We don't really know too much about like the historical background of Beersheba other than a lot of what we see in Genesis. So
Mhm.
Genesis actually gives us a lot of cues on, what exactly um, Beersheba was like and where it was located and everything else like that. But it's so, so important to know, because we got to think when God called Abram, his hometown was Ur, which is over in the,
Mhm.
Babylon, the Babylon area, which is all the way on the other side of the ancient Near East, the first Fertile
Mhm.
Crescent. And then, he journeys up to Haran and spends some time there. And then God finally calls him down. And uh, when he finally arrives, Genesis chapter 21, to Beersheba, it is the southernmost part of what will become the promised land. This is the land
Mhm.
that God promised to Abraham to make him a great nation and everything like that. Beersheba is the southernmost point of that of Israel, of the promised
Mhm.
land. And it's located in the Negev, which just means dry land, desert, literally desert. There's nothing around, as we've talked about. To the west of it is the Sinai Desert. To the east and south is the Arabian Desert. It is literally desert all the way around. It's the
Mhm.
last stop before Egypt and the Sinai Peninsula. So it really is kind of the southern border of what will become the promised land, Israel. As a matter of fact, later on in the Bible, when they talk about the promised land of Israel, they will refer it to, from Dan, the northern city, to Beersheba, from
Mhm.
Dan to Beersheba. So that's kind of just where it is. And it's just right smack dab. I know we've said this before, but right smack dab middle in the middle of nowhere. So I think that's really, really important. And obviously we've talked about the climate. We've talked about how dry it was and just how much of a desert was and how essential water would be.
Mhm.
And really it was an area that was not really populated. It was not very populated because of the climate, but mostly it was just probably shepherds and nomads kind of passing through,
Mhm.
but not really anywhere where you would really want to, lay claim and build a foundation on. We also know from the historical context of Genesis that it's the territory of the Philistines. So as we read Genesis chapter 21 with Abimelech, that was their domain. And of course, the Philistines will become key players in the life of Israel later on as we get into
Mhm.
further into the Old Testament history. So I think that really helps us shape and give us a great historical cultural background to all these events that really happen in Genesis. Not very well populated. I think all that being said, you've got to wonder, you got to have a sense of what was Abraham thinking? What was
Mhm.
Abraham thinking? God's called me here. I pitched my tent here in Beersheba. What am I doing out here? The amount of trust, the amount of just willingness of Abraham just to be along for the ride and the journey and just wait upon the Lord for what was next must have been humongous, because he's probably going, there's nothing out here. What am I doing out here? So
Yeah.
I think that just helps a lot paint the picture of what really is going on here, starting in Genesis chapter 21.
Yeah, thank you for that context. I think it's really interesting what you said about Be'er Sheva being kind of this edge of the promised land and how God took Abraham to the edge of this land that was promised to him to give him another promise and for this story to unfold. I think that's just a really interesting aspect of the story. And like you said, just the harshness of the elements. It is really interesting to think about what Abraham would have been thinking in that environment. Probably like, God,
Yeah.
what are we doing here? So that's definitely interesting to think about when you're in a place like Be'er Sheva. So thank you so much for setting the scene for us. Hopefully some of our listeners may have been there before. Maybe some of our listeners are hoping to go to Be'er Sheva soon, or that might not be something you're planning right now, but anyone can benefit from learning more about the geography of the Bible, definitely. So I wanted to ask you how these different observations that you just listed off shape the way that you read that story.
Yeah, I mean, we've already talked about the essential, it was vital that water would have been the most important thing there. And so once you get to this interaction with Abimelech and the matter over the wells, Abraham dug this well. He dug it. That's probably the first thing that he did after he pitched his tents in Beersheba is, okay, what's next? Okay, we got to figure out water. We have to survive on water. So that was probably the first thing that he did was dig the well. And it says he dug it himself. Then all of a sudden, some of Abimelech's servants come and what do? They overtake the well. They take control of it. Rightfully so. They probably wanted to control the water. And so you see how important this would have been for Abraham to be able to go, I got to figure this out. I've got to approach Abimelech and I've got to figure that, we have got to take care of this or else we're not going to survive. So I think that really helps, paint the picture and helps us see that story really unfold. It also really shows us a lot about Abraham's character. I mean, what does Abraham do when he's faced with an obstacle and he has to go? He not only goes to Abimelech and in his diplomacy works out and establishes a covenant with Abimelech, but he kind of takes the higher road. And, he could have fought for it. He could have said, I built this well, this is my well, you need to get your guys away. But what does he do? He goes above and beyond, and he, in the covenant, in this treaty, he brings 7 ewe lambs and he presents them and basically is saying, hey, these 7 ewe lambs will signify this covenant that this well belongs to me. In a sense, even though I built the well, I'm also going to just pay you for it. I'm going to give you a gift to say, just to establish, okay, moving forward, this is my well. I just think that speaks volumes to who Abraham was and his character. And certainly we know he wasn't perfect by any means, and he made a lot of mistakes. And there was a lot of times where he didn't trust the Lord and, threw his wife under the bus twice, Sarah's his sister and everything like that. But we do see in this situation, Abraham and just his character and who he was as a leader when faced with this situation of what are we going to do for water? And he comes up, and honestly, that's where the name Be'er Sheva comes from. So it comes from this covenant treaty that he made with Abimelech, and literally Be'er means well, and Sheva, it could mean one of two things, oath or the 7. So well of the 7, referring to the ewe lambs, or well of the oath, in this oath, this covenant that he made with Abimelech.
That is so fascinating to think about, even the significance of the name of Be'er Sheva, and thinking about Abraham making this covenant. And he not only made the covenant, he presented these lambs as a symbol of the covenant. That's just a really beautiful picture of Abraham's character, like you said, how he responded to this really interesting situation. So thank you so much for walking us through this story today. It definitely helps me get a bigger understanding of Be'er Sheva. And it really is, it's more than just a desert. There's a lot of really significant historical and biblical things that happened in that desert. So Thank you so much, Jared, for joining us today, and we really appreciate your insights.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me. Enjoyed my time.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Discover Your Roots. For more resources, be sure to check out the links in the show notes. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on future episodes. To learn more about Passages, visit www.passagesisrael.org or follow us on Instagram @PassagesIsrael.